If you had gone longer with this book, would it have been more expensive to self-publish?
Yeah, I think
If
so.
it had gone over like 500 pages?
I'm not sure exactly how they determine the production costs on these, but I think every 2 pages or every actual 4 pages, like one sheet of paper is worth, I think, would add another 2 cents or something like that to the cost of the book.
That sounds about right. And I know once you get above about 125,000 words, the binding becomes much more of an issue because trade paper is dependent on being able to do this. And if it's this thick, it's much more expensive to do, and they actually have to sew it, and rather than do whatever magic they do.
I think under standard format rules, the standards of it, I think I was like at 103,000. But by actual word count, it was like 119,000.
It's amazing how different it always is.
But that's just an area of how big it was, and I think the second one would be almost exactly the same because this was 412 pages, I think, manuscript, and I think that's where that one's at right now. It's
consistent of you.
Yeah.
Are you taking readers' responses into account when you're revising the next book and picturing the third? Yes. Not to give it away, it's a trilogy. Or you could go longer, actually. Do a series.
I want to say it might be a trilogy. It might go beyond that. In a way, this story basically completes itself in the first 2, but then I'm going on from there again into kind of another scenario, and I have ideas for 2 or 3 beyond that. And I also have ideas for things that go back farther into the history of the island and the world that they end up in.
Oh, interesting. So you could do other adventures that aren't with these characters. Right. That's the real advantage of creating a fantasy world, I think, is that you can...
And that's why I think it's fantasy. Sometimes, there's no magic in it per se other than and I would call it more pseudoscience that gets them from one world to the other. Something that someday in the future, from our standpoint, that they will maybe discover what this is or something that gets them from there.
Yeah. How to make the jump. How do you know when you're writing a fantasy what is too outlandish? Your writing is very realism based for a fantasy. How did you decide what was and wasn't kosher, for lack of a better word? Your taste?
Yeah, maybe my taste, and also I didn't want anything in this story. As much as I like stories with dragons and that in it, I didn't want anything abnormal. Probably the biggest fantasy thing that comes through in a way is the fact that the people in this other world are slightly more superstitious. And whether or not that comes through or not, that's just what I'm thinking of, because there is some superstition involved in what happens in here as to why things happen.
Yeah, they're legends.
They're legends. They're a little more in tune with some of the legends of what's going on and why this island is special, not only in their world, but to the people that come in from this world.
That makes sense. I think it's interesting to me because I edit a lot of fantasy and I see I hear a lot of pitches and I see a lot of queries, and I think it's interesting how often fantasy writers will rein themselves in, where they'll try to make it very accessible from this world, whereas you actually could. Okay, you want a dragon on that cloud, you can have a dragon on that cloud. I think fantasy writers are often very restrained in that respect, and I respect that. I'm not sure that I could do it, but.